Okay, welcome everybody. Oh, wow, hi. So thanks for coming today. Kim and Kate are going to be talking all about the Jain Shrine, including conservation and a little bit more about the shrine itself. So we're going to spend some time down here, and then we're going to go up into the gallery so you can actually look at the object. And Kate has a surprise. Hopefully we'll be able to get to see the inside of the shrine, which is a nice treat. So without further ado, I will welcome them on stage.
Hello. I would say good morning, but I think we just passed it. So what I would like to do with my time with you, we'll do two presentations. I'll talk first, and I'll talk a bit about introducing Jainism and some of the iconography that you'll find on our shrine, and a little bit about where it might have come from and how it would have been used in its original context. And that's something that we are still actively researching, which we can talk about with you later. And then Kate will take over and really walk you through the restoration and the really interesting discoveries that were made during the treatment of the shrine. So our topics today first are a bit about Jainism, or Jainism, you may have heard the religion called. And so we'll talk a little bit about the beliefs associated with this tradition and the figures, the people or teachers who are associated with the tradition, and about the various communities associated with Jainism and what they do, which lends itself to the discussion of why a shrine like this would have been created. We'll then walk through a couple areas on the shrine in some detail to talk about the symbolism or the iconographic program that is present. And then we'll tease you with some ideas about where it might be from. So to begin with, have any of you ever seen a painting, a representation that looks something like this? What would you call it if you were shown this with no title? It's a mandala, and it absolutely is. This is a Jain mandala, and this is a depiction of the universe, kind of in a schematic diagram, the way that they conceived it. And there are some things that you'll notice. There's a center, it's a mountain, it's drawn as a circle here, and you have these cosmic rivers which flow out of it, very much actually like the ideas of paradisial rivers in the Western traditions. And then you have these rings of lands or continents which are separated by oceans, which are the blue circles that you see here. And many of you you're probably familiar with the idea of a mandala, or a kind of conceptual universe in the Buddhist context or the Hindu context. And I would say that if it is possible to be more detailed in one's understanding of space and reality and beings and their place in it, if it's possible to be more detailed than the Buddhists are in their thinking, then it's what the Jains have developed in terms of their understanding. But they share many concepts, and so you often hear these religions talked about together because of these similarities. And some of these are foundational to ancient Indian thought, the ancient Indian worldview, which gave birth to both Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism. And so those foundational elements is that the world we're living in and the time we live in is not a straight line with a beginning or an end. It's cyclic. And the soul, however, whatever we call that, and we'll talk about what the Jainas think about the idea of the soul, but whatever it is, that consciousness that's within us is eternal. So while lives and patterns of time are circular, that soul is eternal. And for Jains, that soul is in everything. It's in human beings, you and I. It's in animals. It's in plants. It's in microbes. They really do see the cosmos as kind of a living entity. And the problem, and if you're into new ecology or Buddhist ecology, for example, you know the concern about the idea of every living thing's impact on something else. And the Jains take this very seriously. So they strongly believe in the concept of karma, which is also fundamental to the Indian religions. And karma is kind of the sticky stuff that travels with you, attached to your soul. It's like a cosmic scorecard, and it keeps track of your deeds. And your deeds, whether intentional or not, impact everything around you. And so the goal of Jainism is to eliminate karma by causing no harm. And in order to do that, you dedicate yourself to ahimsa, A-H-I-M-S-A, which means nonviolence, to do no harm. And so the goal of Jainism, like Hinduism, like Buddhism, is to develop to a point where you can achieve or receive release from the cycle of samsara, life, death, and rebirth, from this kind of cosmic worldview into nothing, a blank piece of paper. And at that point in this belief system, your soul has united its pure being. And you and your essence have left the world, the universe, forever. So there are a lot of similarities. This comes out of the ancient South Indian worldview. And this was one of many traditions that was developed, founded by teachers or gurus in the early centuries before the turn of the Common Era. So the teachers in the Jain tradition are known as Jinas, which you see here, J-I-N-A. Or another word for them, and perhaps a more meaningful one in some ways, is Tirthankara. And I'm sure you'll see that coming up soon, but it's T-I-R-T-H-A K, I should look at that before I tell you, Tirthank, N-K-A-R-A. And Tirthankara means a ford maker. Tirtha is a ford, a crossing place in a river or a body of water, and a Tirthankara is one who makes the crossing. So it's one who has gone over to the other side because of their spiritual development and accomplishments, but it's also really important because the other meaning is you made the ford for others to follow behind you. And so these figures, and there are 24 of them in the Jain tradition, are exemplars. They've not only achieved moksha, or eventual release from the cycle of samsara, but through their teaching and their examples to people who are still caught in the system, they have become role models for them to adopt their thought, their actions, and hopefully find their own way across the river. And this is a beautiful bronze, actually, upstairs in the Indian temple gallery. I want to point it out because 9th century of the Common Era in South India, this is a pretty early and important piece. There's not much here to tell you who this Jina is. Any one of the 24 Jinas would be possible with the identification, and that's actually very much part of the art associated with Jainism, because once you've achieved that status, you lose your worldly attributes. And so to communicate that, oftentimes all of the jhanas might be shown together and they're identical. And it's to show they've left their earthly attributes, their physical appearance behind, and are depicted in a perfect form, identical to one another. You'll also notice that he's depicted nude, or from what we can tell, at least nearly nude, and that's something else associated with Jain religious practices, because if you become an advanced practitioner, you become an ascetic. And there are actually two traditions which we'll talk about, and you can see this, one of them clearly illustrated on the shrine upstairs. So the nudity, the asceticism, of course, these ideas again go back in time in ancient India. And I just wanted to bring in two images which scholars still hotly debate about whether these are Jain images or not. So on my right is a nearly life-size sandstone polished sculpture from the Maurya dynasty, around 300 or so BCE. And you can see that it was never, there's no indication that clothing was ever meant to be part of its carved depiction. Whether it was ever draped or not, we don't know. But then on the right side is a sculpture that actually is deceiving from this slide because it can fit in the palm of your hand. And this was excavated at a site called Harappa in Pakistan. This is associated with the Indus Valley civilization, and it may date to somewhere between 2500 to 1900 BCE. So whether Jainism itself dates to that date, certainly the idea of asceticism, of yoga, of austerities, all the building blocks that this tradition developed from were very well established over 5,000 years ago. But the most famous jhana is the jhana associated with our time, the most recent, the 24th jhana, or Tirthankara, and that is Mahavira. And Mahavira was a historical figure. He traditionally was assumed to have been born in 599 BCE, but some scholars now want to adjust that to 540 based upon other textual sources. But he was a historic figure. He was born in eastern India in the state of Bihar. And his story, just like the geography that he inhabited, is also similar to that of Shakyamuni Buddha, who also was a historic figure, born and teaching and living about the same time, and also born in Bihar, India. The figure of Mahavira, or his historic form, is quite interesting, and it also parallels the story of the Buddha in some ways. He was born into a royal family, the son of a king named Siddhartha, a popular name, so they're not quite that connected, these two traditions. Born of King Siddhartha and Queen Trishula. And so this was a Kshatriya family, meaning a family of the warrior class, and their job is to rule and defend, if you're a member of that class. This is in the Hindu kind of, or what becomes Hinduism, kind of worldview. But it's said that their family, regardless of that status, followed the teachings of Parshva, who was the jhana preceding his birth. And so he was raised with Jain sensibilities. And at the age of 30, after his parents had died, he decided to leave the palace and his royal lifestyle, and he became an ascetic. And I'm using some illustrations. I'm sorry the resolution isn't great, but some illustrations from a manuscript, a Jain manuscript that we recently acquired here at the Nelson Atkins to show a bit of his life. So here we see on the left that figure kneeling on the throne, grasping its hair. That's actually Mahavira with his beautiful long princely hair, which was very much a sign of your virility. And so you'll see male kings and heroes and gods and Indian traditions with beautiful coiffures, just like the women are depicted. And he is about to renounce his lifestyle. So he's grabbing the hair. It's just about the moment for the tonsure, where you cut the hair off and become an ascetic or a mendicant. And then in the middle, we see him with his hair cut in a robe, handing his garments over. He's giving away his clothing, because that's another one of the activities that you take on when you are a mendicant. And then at the far side, surrounded in this kind of cosmic diagram, is Mahavira, after 12 years of asceticism, achieving a state of enlightenment. And for that, we have different deities or other jinas who descend down and inhabit parts of the mandala to be present for that auspicious moment. So the activities that Mahavira did and advocated form 5 vows, which we associate with monastic communities in Jainism. And the vows are, of course, the primary activity, which all people, all Jains, lay, and monastic should try to follow, which is nonviolence, or ahimsa. Then on top of that, no stealing, no lying, no possessions, which you see him here giving away his things, including his hair. And Mahavira added chastity to this list through his example. So he becomes the model for monastic communities. And among Jains, they would say that there are really 4 classes of Jain practitioners. There's male and female monastics, people who've become ascetics, left society, and are on this spiritual path, people who adhere to those 5 vows, and then male and female lay people. And the lay community in Jainism is incredibly large and active and generous. And the shrine that we have here would be associated with a lay household, not a monastic residence. So what you're seeing here is a kind of a monastic kind of community which is formed in the top in London, and it's actually not officially recognized by Jains, because according to them, the monks can only live and nuns can only live and develop towards moksha in the pure land at the center of the universe, and that's India. So they've developed these as a modern diaspora community. You see in Great Britain in particular, and I believe there's a community like this in California. But for everyone else, you're a lay person outside of India. I think the view on the bottom is a ritual festival celebration in India. But then there's wonderful architecture associated with both lay and monastic communities. So here you see a relatively elaborate set of caves from Ellora in western India. And if you look at them, you'll notice, and if I can figure out how to work the light, so you have these large areas carved out, and these look like a constructed monastery where people could sit in the center and have teachings. Then there would be a shrine with an image of a Jina, perhaps Mahavira. He might be the most commonly depicted, and other cells that come off to the sides. Some are very small, just enough to lay down in or sit and meditate in for monks who might be there in residence. And they also have temples. And so you're seeing probably the grandest, or one of the grandest ones in India. Have any of you been here? All right. Ranakpur in the state of Rajasthan. And who've been here, do you want to tell us, what were your impressions? Go for it. It's an incredible place. And so any of you, if you go to India, I strongly recommend going to Udaipur, which you'll want to do anyways, and then doing a trip to this beautiful site. And when you talk about being peaceful and secluded, this is a temple, but it also was a large monastic complex. And so patrons construct things for the monks to live in peace, away from society, kind of a monastic retreat. So they picked this beautiful mountain location that's not near to any major city, but it's close enough that lay people can come and worship at the temple and then bring gifts of money or food for the monks or nuns when they inhabit the place. So you're seeing the interior. And they're very much, Jain temples, very much set up similar to how a Hindu temple is. And so you often have a pillared porch, and then you enter in, and then directly opposite the door. And so some of these, like this one, actually have 3 main entrances or 4 main entrances at cardinal directions and multiple shrines. But you'll be on an axis with that door and a inner shrine where an image of the Jinnah will be represented in stone in a temple like this, or usually in metal if it's in a home shrine. And it's very interesting because you see some slippage here, because it's very clear in Jain texts, Jain traditions, that you use images of the Jinnah, and you might treat them with respect. And in the Indian context, that's doing puja, things you would do to a Hindu icon. You might dress them, offer them food, flowers, but it's a way of honoring them, and it's meant to honor the memory of the Jinnah, and you're meant to meditate on them as a role model and how you can purify yourself and become more like them. But it crosses various lines. And so if you go to Ranakpur, a large Jain temple like this has priests present who help conduct your prayer and your ritual for you, help you make your offerings to the icon. And those priests at these large temples are Hindu Brahmin priests, because they're trained in rituals and Sanskrit, and they can make that offering correctly. But Jains themselves never developed a priesthood. So there's a very interesting kind of symbiotic relationship going on. So that brings us to the Nelson Atkins Shrine, and this is how it looked after its treatment was finished, and it was first assembled in our conservation lab. And I think you can see some of the elements that you would expect to associate with a freestanding temple. You have pillars, and there would have been a small extending roof, a ceiling to the shrine, and so this would have replicated the very basic, what's called a mandapa, or pillared porch that stands before a shrine door. Behind these doors, these probably would have been built right up against a wall, and they would have opened into a niche, perhaps built into the wall, where there would have been an image. And we know from its scale and from other examples in comparative study that this was probably not part of a freestanding temple, but was part of a home shrine. And I'll walk you through the experience of visiting a medieval home shrine in a few minutes in the presentation, so you can get an idea of the kind of place that the Nelson Shrine probably came from. It entered the collection in 1932, and it was purchased in New York from the dealer Hagop Kevorkian, who was a very famous dealer of Islamic art and also Indian art. And it was purchased, I imagine, at a time when the trustees who were building the collection, they had a year to build a collection at that point for opening the museum in 1933. And they were looking for things that were kind of wow pieces, looking at architecture. If you think about how many period rooms this museum used to have, something like 8 or 9 in the European and American galleries, and 3 in the Asian galleries. And this was probably meant for that kind of purpose, but it was never installed in the galleries. In fact, it may have only, as far we've heard, it may have been installed temporarily once and taken down quickly after. Maybe it was a trial run, and that would have been, I don't know, sometime decades ago, but it was never permanently installed. And I have some guesses. I don't know if these are things to share with the public, but one is that after this was acquired, the Hindu temple ceiling was acquired, the beautiful wooden coffered ceiling where the bronzes are in Gallery 227 or 8. And I think that was such an outstanding and large and powerful example. And they have very limited space for India in that initial installation. So I think that's one reason this wasn't installed. The other reason will become obvious in Kate's, I think, presentation. But here's a look at the doors after they were cleaned, and at least part of the lintels. The lintels, of course, are these upper structures that help frame the top, and there are actually 3 of them. And we'll look at 2 of them in particular. And then also you'll want to pay attention to what's going on inside the panels of the doors. So we'll start with that. And I'll tell you that the iconography of the doors depicts 2 very key sets of images that are deeply associated with Jainism, Jain beliefs and Jain practices. And so starting from the top 3.5 rows depict 14 dreams. These were visions had by Queen Trishula while she was pregnant with Mahavira, who actually, it was a bit of some divine intervention in his conception. So it was a bit of a miraculous pregnancy, and she had visions. And these visions are well known because these were had by each of the mothers who gave birth to a Jinnah. And so as the story is told, and all Jains repeat the story and they know the visions, they know the power of that story and its power connected to motherhood and giving birth to a great religious leader. So the images, and they're actually in order, so they go, let's go across the top, left to right, an elephant, a bull, a lion, the goddess, I keep hitting the wrong thing, the goddess Lakshmi, flowers, the full moon, and here you see this beautiful cow jumping in the moon, the sun, a large banner, a silver urn, here ours is gold, but a lake filled with lotuses, the cosmic ocean of milk, a celestial vehicle, a chariot for the gods in the sky, a heap of gemstones, and a fire that burns without smoke. And then below them, we have 6 coffers left and 8 auspicious symbols, which again, like the auspicious symbols in Buddhism, are symbols of Jainism. And so you can see, in order to fit them all, 2 of these have to be double panels, but they include various emblems and like a mirror to fish, a kind of endless knot as kind of maze. And the one you'll get asked about in the galleries is that, and it is the swastika. And this is an ancient, ancient Indian symbol, traveled across Eurasia, and it is an inherently good and positive symbol. And if you notice it, it even turns the opposite way of the Nazi swastika. And so oftentimes people ask about that, and you have to say, you know, it was a symbol of absolute goodness, the North Star, the pivot of the universe that spins around it in ancient Asian thought, and it was appropriated and destroyed in the 20th century by Hitler. But it's important to point that out because when I'm up there, I have visitors ask me about that, why it would be on the shrine. And then just some fun elements compared to our manuscript, how some of these same visions are depicted on the shrine. So in the Nelson manuscript, this is the Lotus Lake, and you see this carved a couple places on our shrine. And this wonderful patterned diagonal body of water is the cosmic ocean of milk in our manuscript. But look how they did it on our shrine with a modern seafaring vessel. And this Gujarat, where this is from, is very close to the Arabian Sea. So you may even have foreigners depicted. The main lintel, the large lintel that sits above the doors, is very striking. It's filled with musicians and women and men bearing flower garlands. But the central figure might draw some questions from your visitors because that is Lakshmi, a Hindu goddess, and this is a particular form known as Gaja Lakshmi here, where she's being bathed by elephants. And you can see very closely that it's absolutely her. You have the elephants here. You have the 2 lotuses on either side that she would be holding if all of her arms were there. You have the pot here of wealth, of coins. And so the question you'll get if this comes up is, well, what on earth is a Hindu goddess doing on this Jain shrine? And the truth is that there was a very long association with Lakshmi and temple architecture in India centuries and centuries before this shrine was ever made. And Lakshmi or Ganesh are both extremely common figures to find on that central lintel. So if it's not the main figure who's enshrined, and often it is, in fact, on the lower and upper lintels, you have an enshrined Jinnah in the center of the doorway. But Lakshmi's presence here, it's even a royal symbol when she's being kind of cleansed, ritually purified with elephants. She brings auspiciousness to the space of the shrine. And it's a very appropriate symbol. And you might find her even in Buddhist contexts, as well as Hindu or Jain contexts. And she also is in the dreams. If you remember, the goddess Lakshmi is the 4th vision that Queen Trishula dreams about. So in Jainism, there are no gods per se, but just like in Buddhism, some of those gods play into the stories and play into the tradition and have a part in that tradition, even if they're not a primary focus of worship. And so she is one of those. And then you have a really interesting upper lintel, and I want to point out a couple elements of that. So you have several enshrined jinnas, and they're all golden, and they all look identical. And so these ones we may never pick out which ones they are. We can certainly take a try at it. I would take a stab at it, but that's not a very Jain thing to say. But you have these other wonderful elements, the repeating lotus pond. So it's very possible, because of the repeating elements, that you're seeing different jinnas historically and symbols that would have been associated with each of their lives. But then here, notice these guys and these fellows here. So these figures with their robes and their beards and their turbans are certainly not Jain ascetics. And they're like this in their depiction with hands raised. These are patrons, no doubt. Whether they were patrons in a narrative that we've yet to identify here, patronizing a monk doing a ritual, or whether they're the patrons who paid for the shrine, which has no inscriptions, so we don't know the family or the patron associated with it. But to show you how commonly patrons are often depicted in Jain religious architecture. And so you see a kneeling group of patrons, men and women, here at Ranakpur Temple, for example. And then you have the monks. And so here's a partially cleaned image of the three monks. And I don't know if you can see here, just start to, but can you see his face? What's he wearing? A mask. It's like he's driving in Beijing or something like that. He's wearing a mask because for Jain mendicants, and sometimes even lay people do this, your commitment to ahimsa is so strong that you don't want to inhale any insects or microbes and accidentally kill them. You might walk with a broom that you brush the insects away so you don't accidentally trample them. You might, and this was a famous story about Gandhi, who was not a Jain, but looked to Jainism for the foundation of his personal beliefs and practices around ahimsa. Put out the fire at night because you're killing mosquitoes who are attracted to it. This is very powerful meaning in Jainism. So they often wear a cloth, and if they're also, in this case, he appears to be performing a ritual. So the other thing you don't want to do is harm the faith. And if you're talking, you've got the text in front of you and you spit accidentally, what if you smear some of the sacred words? What if you actually hurt the ideas of the faith? And so that's another reason the monks, when they're doing recitations, will cover their mouth. And also, you notice they're dressed. They're not nude. So that means this is the white-clad sect of Jainism, and it's like there are two main divisions and then multiple, like many religions, multiple subsections or regional traditions. But the two main sects are the sky-clad, which is called Digambara, and that's Digambhara. And that is not the tradition associated with this home shrine. And then white-clad, which is Svetambara, and that's Svetambhara. So this is a clue into the sect the doors are associated with. And then I wanted to point out another couple things here to you. Some of the details which you see here, just fun details like these wonderful spindles that hang down and birds. You see them on medieval and modern temples. Here's some spindles here, peacocks here. And finally, where did this come from? Well, it came to us attributed to the city of Patan. I'll just show you a couple images from Patan. Here, not much is left of the medieval city, which used to be a Hindu capital, and then the capital of a Islamic sultanate. up until 1411, but you see some of the walls, and it's those Hindu kings that built beautiful temples, like the Sun Temple at Modera, you see here. Very famous for their carving in Patan. And Ahmedabad, the great city founded in 1411 by Ahmed Shah, who was a sultan, an Islamic sultan, who ruled Patan and then built a new capital city, and eventually, along with local Muslims, Hindus and Jains moved to the city for work to serve the court, and it's where local industry was situated. So many Jains built townhouses in the city like this one, and almost all of these are gone. We were there in the fall, and we went with a guide, an architectural conservator who's actually working on a project to get the old city of Ahmedabad on the UNESCO Protected Cultural Heritage List. And when we went 50 years ago, there was a census that there were 50 Jain families left in their old houses in the city. The research from this summer suggests there are 5. And we tried to visit 3, and I'll show you this one. So this is Kushi Shah, our guide, and you can see the beautiful wood carving around the door frames and still framing the house. And these are multi-story townhouses. You can see this here's the ground floor. And you look up to the 3rd story and climb up. And then the most protected corner space, most private, most clean, removed from the street, is this small room. And here's their home shrine. And you can see an old wooden polychrome shrine attached, abutting the wall. And at some point it was decided it was no longer appropriate, but they didn't remove it. They kept it there and bought a newer silver-clad shrine and set up in front of it. And if you look at it closely, you can see some of the details. Here's the visions with the heap of jewels and the smokeless flame. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kate, who will now walk you through our conservation treatment, and then we'll head upstairs for a few minutes afterward. Do we have the computer to close these?
This is gone.
Can you switch them over, Kevin?
That's Kim's. Mine's blue. Mine is blue. It'll be under curatorial. There. Then you go down. There. South and Southeast Asian. And then keep going down. No. Wrong shrine. Keep going down.
It's down for, it'll be a PowerPoint, just a loose PowerPoint. Towards the bottom.
Keep going. It's a PowerPoint all by itself. There you go. Yeah. There we go. That one. Well, my part of the story started quite some time ago. This was the only photograph we had of the Jain Shrine. We knew it had been purchased in 1932, but it may or may not have been on display for some short time, but nobody knew much about it except that it was in storage in a lot of different parts. In 1996, Mark Wilson asked us to take a look at it, see if we could do anything to make it look better, because you can see it has a very, very dark surface, a very discolored varnish layer. You could tell that there was paint on it, but you couldn't tell it was going on because the varnish layer was so dirty. And I had a very talented intern at the time who did try to do something about it, and he was able to kind of get it to that clean. And it was decided that it just wasn't worth it. It wasn't enough of a change. It would still be a very grimy, hard to decipher piece, and it went back to storage. And then when Kim came, she heard rumors about the Jain Shrine and got kind of excited about it. And we went out to our off-site storage and dug the pieces up. There are over 20 different pieces of it. And they'd all been spread around. We didn't know if we were missing anything, what went with what. But Kim asked us to take a harder look at it and try some different cleaning techniques. And over the 10 years that this was in storage, there have been some new developments in paintings conservation involving using what we call solvent gels. And rather than just using solvents to remove the varnish, which can easily harm the paint, we're mixing the solvents into specific types of gels, and that allows the solvent to stay on the surface of the varnish and not eat through to the paint quite as fast. And I was delighted to see what happened to this one little figure on the lintel here. And we could also see that there was quite a bit of paint left, flaking paint, and that suggested that there might be earlier layers of paint. As you know, it's often an act of worship or devotion to repaint or refurbish these pieces, these religious pieces, and we would have expected that on something of this age. And you can see it, this is just a little tiny, that's probably a 1-inch chip of paint showing the wood there, and you can see the different layers. And I'm just going to use this illustration a bit to kind of explain what I'm talking about, because when we start examining paint layers, our conservation scientist, John Twilley, comes and takes these microscopic, the size of a pinhead, samples and cuts through all the layers and studies them. You can analyze each layer, you can look at how they're joined together, and you get a lot of information about the original structure. We have the teak wood down here, the base. Then this is a ground and preparation layer, which is made out of red lead and cinnabar. Then there was a green layer in some parts, a layer of grime, which is always a good thing to find because it means that that was an exposed surface for some time before it was refurbished. Then there was another red preparation layer, and then there was this green, which John analyzed, and it turned out to be an arsenic green, emerald green, or Scheele's green, which was really interesting to us because that is a commercial pigment that was invented was available commercially around 1814. So we knew that anything that had that layer of green in it was after 1814, which was sort of what Kim was half expecting and hoping to hear. And most of that dirt was this varnish layer that had been applied over the paint and it never quite dried, so it was kind of gummy and run around and picked up a lot of dirt and was disfiguring everything and just made it look really shabby. Another interesting discovery was looking at the blues. Now these are tiny little chips of paint. This is the bottom half of this piece. And you'll see this blue here. And that's a very different color blue than this one. And what was particularly interesting about this is it's actually natural ultramarine. And that is made from ground up lapis lazuli, which is a semi-precious stone, as you know, but was only available in Afghanistan. And all throughout history, in the West or in the East, natural ultramarine was a very valuable pigment because it came from Afghanistan through the trade routes. So that would be the original blue, the first layer. And then this is a later layer that was made with indigo, very ancient pigment as well. It's actually a dye, but much cheaper and prevalent everywhere. And the reason we kind of latch on to this ultramarine is that it means that it was a very expensive and an important commission when it was first made. Interestingly enough, there were only 2 layers on this. The original layer and then the refurbishment layer, which is mostly what we're looking at today. There's very little of the original layer that we could detect, just small little pockets. And this is just sort of run through some of the scientific techniques that John uses to look at the pigments. This again is a little fragment of the top layer. Oops. Here is where it broke off from the layer below. This is orange, which is red lead, and on top of that, there's a red color that is actually cinnabar red. And here is the white, which is white lead, all very typical pigments. And then on top of it is the emerald green, the arsenic-based green. And on top of that is the resin. So by looking at these things in a scanning electron microscope, you can start to learn a lot about the pigments and how they were applied by looking at the structure of the various crystals. You can see, for example, the green is very coarse compared to the red. And if you look at it here, the green, again, you can see how much larger the green crystals are and the white lead here. And down here, you see that they're particles of pigment, but it's sort of mushy and amorphous. That's because it's got a lot more medium in it. It's got more resin in it. And again, this is the top layer of grime and dirt. Another technique that was particularly useful for the blues is looking at it with polarized light microscopy. Indigo is a dye. It's very hard to identify, actually, except through microscopy. And here's the indigo. It's actually attached to white lead, while as the natural lapis, the natural ultramarine, is this nice dark blue crystal here. Kim was hoping very much we might be able to help her achieve a more precise date for the wooden parts, and so we looked at radiocarbon dating, where you take a little chip off the wood. You have to pick the right place to do it, because radiocarbon dating tells you when the tree was chopped down, when it died. And so you want the outermost part of the limb of wood as much as possible. And you'll probably see it better in this picture. You can see the concentric rings from the tree. So we took it from here to give us the latest possible date, which was about 1650, which is what Kim was hoping to hear. So our shrine actually dates to about 1650. And we also took a sample here for wood ID, which is teak. No big surprise there. But the little sample, actually, you can see how small it is. Right there. We took several from different parts of the shrine to confirm that all the pieces were of a similar age. The doors, as Kim said, it's actually a cupboard, so the doors do open. And inside they look kind of ratty. They have this old deteriorated mirror. And then underneath there's the teak wood itself. And I'll tell you more about this later, but these are actually handmade nails. And the wooden framing here, the molding, was added later. And we know that because it's been put in with machine-made nails. And here you can see there's absolutely nothing left of any interest. But when we look at it with infrared photography, you can see that there was a design, and this probably corresponds to a design that was painted on it when the shrine was first made. You can see it's foliage design. I used some Photoshop here just to kind of enhance it to show you what there might be, but believe me, there's no evidence of this to the naked eye. We did radiography on it too. This is one of the columns, and this white shape here, and the other one right here, again, those are handmade nails. Those indicate a certain age. And to sort of show you what I'm talking about, this is what a handmade nail looks like. It's forged, it's hand forged. Machine-made nails here are, they're pressed out of a machine, and then you have machine-made screws. We found all of these in the shrine, and that was interesting because it helped us sort of determine a sequence of repair and reconstruction. As Kim was hinting, the Jains don't like to waste things. That would not be a good thing, and so they try to reuse often, and we did find evidence of that. This is a radiograph of the lintel, and you see the Lakshmi figure here, and all these red arrows indicate handmade nails, and in fact, these are repairs of a later restoration. There was some severe woodworm damage in here, and then these were just attached to another piece of more modern wood with nails. Very able intern, Jamie, who is here vacuuming the surface. After we did the technical studies, we cleaned up all the dirt off that, and I was using a paintbrush and a little micro vacuum here. And then it was consolidated because a lot of the paint was flaking, and before we could clean it, we had to make sure it was stable and was going to stay on the wood. And everything we do, of course, we take very careful notes. These are my cleaning notes showing which solvents worked where, and to develop a recipe of exactly how we were going to clean this. A variety of the different solvent gels we were using. And here's Jamie cleaning it. You can see how much of the varnish layer was coming off and the bright colors underneath. This red dye is kind of interesting. It's actually sort of a violet. It's an actual dye and kind of transparent. We never were able to identify it though. And the doors during cleaning. These are pieces of mirror. And there's probably one here, I'm guessing, as well. And just to show you some details, the little ship after cleaning. The metal hinges and stuff were also painted. And you can barely see it, a lot of the detail here. These white dots on a lovely blue here. They didn't show at all, really. It was hardly possible to tell they were there. And there was also gold leaf as well. And I'm showing you this figure because she's very pretty. And again, these garlands down here running up and down, you can't see them here. And it was only after cleaning them that you could distinguish them there. And there's the hinge. Details of some of the decorations. And this piece just took over the lab. We all worked on it. I'd say 2 people worked on it for about a year, just total, just to clean it and consolidate it. And then the next step was to put all the pieces back together in the lab, make sure we had everything, and decide how we were going to display it. And this is the wooden framework that it's actually installed on right now. That's what's holding it together in place. And it enables us to move it around too as needed. And at the end of the project, it was really wonderful to see how little restoration, or how much of the original piece was still there. The green arrows indicate some capitals that are quite clearly later the wood is poorly carved. It may not even be the same wood. And then these figures down here, there's a detail of it. Those are actually panels that are nailed back together. They're old, but the quality is not the same, as you can probably see. This is one of the original figures, and see how elaborate and well painted it is compared to the figure on the bottom of the capitals, the columns. And again, that seems to have been a reuse, because we have the heads of the machine-made nails. And finally, this is the door before cleaning. And this was the other piece that Kim was very concerned about, because while it looks old, it's in the wrong place. It's actually supposed to be a ceiling panel. And the paint sequences are very different to what we found on the rest of the piece. So it seemed likely that it came from another shrine and then was just tucked there to hide the modern framework. But the design department took off with that, because they used that piece they did a laser scanning of that part, and with that laser scan, we're able to make a new prototype in a wood composite material to use for our missing ceiling. And we can go up and take a look at that now, unless you have some questions. For two people, it was a year of pretty much full time. I mean, we work on other things at the same time. It was in the lab for 2 years, let's say. Okay, this is an interesting question, probably not to be repeated to our visitors, but what we used was fish glue. And it's a consolidant, a traditional consolidant we like very much, because it doesn't darken, it's easily reversed, it's very easy to use, and it's very compatible with the original layers. But of course, the Jains are very strict vegetarians, and there was a thought that this might offend some of the Jains. But I've been thinking about this in my mind, and we know that the paint almost certainly had a tempera binder, it had a glue binder in it, so the paint itself probably already had animal product in it, so I don't feel too badly about using the fish glue. But don't repeat that. Yes. Any other questions? Well, let's go up and see it.